This is the 7 levels of community defense in The Walking Dead. Level 1, the farm. Starting with the most peaceful and probably the most naive level of community defense, Herschel's farm. The main thing this place had going for it was that it was in the middle of nowhere. That's it. That was the whole plan. The defense relied on the idea that if the zombies couldn't find you, they couldn't eat you. They used the farmhouse and the barn for shelter, and that was pretty much the extent of their security system. It was a cozy setup, sure, but it was like hiding in your bedroom during a hide-and-seek game and just hoping nobody checks the house. And that leads us to the farm's gigantic "we're all gonna die" flaw. It had 0 real perimeter. We're talking about a few dinky fences that were meant to hold cows, not the undead. The entire strategy was based on not being discovered, which is a great plan until, a herd of walkers comes right to your doorstep. They had no watchtowers, no real walls, and definitely no one with any serious combat training. It was a bunch of regular folks hoping their luck would hold. So, for the long haul, this place was a ticking time bomb. Its viability was extremely low. It wasn't a matter of if it would fall, but when. All it took was one bad day, which let a massive herd wander right in for the entire dream to come crashing down. The farm teaches us the most basic lesson of the apocalypse. Hope is not a strategy. You can't just cross your fingers and expect to survive. Level 2, the sanctuary. On the second tier of community defense in The Walking Dead, we land at one of the most infamous strongholds in the entire universe, the Sanctuary. At first glance, it looks like a fortress built to last forever. A massive factory wrapped in chain-link fences, metal barricades, and towering walls. But what made the Sanctuary stand out was its signature defensive trick, a moat of walkers. The Savior stacked undead bodies around the perimeter, hung them from poles, and later even coated their heads in molten metal to make them harder to kill. This gave them a living, growling warning system that could slow down any approaching enemy. It looked intimidating, and it worked. For a while. Inside those walls, though, the structure that really kept the sanctuary running was Negan's system of control. Everything relied on fear, punishment, and strict hierarchy. People earned points for good behavior, worked brutal jobs, and lived under a regime where one man's word was law.
If you try to skirt it, if you try to cut that corner!
That power held the place together, but it also meant the entire community stood on a shaky foundation. If Negan wasn't there, the system didn't function. If the supply lines dried up, the whole place would starve, and both of those things inevitably happened. The fatal flaws of the sanctuary were baked into its design. First, it had no real food production. They didn't farm, they didn't hunt enough, and they didn't grow anything. Instead, they forced other communities to pay tribute in food, weapons, and labor. That's simply living on borrowed time. Second, the internal instability was impossible to fix. When your workers are basically prisoners, you don't have loyalty. You have pressure waiting to explode, and once Negan fell, everything collapsed right on schedule. Once the Saviors lost control and the tribute stopped flowing, the place became a sinking ship with no way to repair itself. It briefly hung on under new leaders like Daryl and Carol, but without real food, real community, or purpose, the place eventually withered into an empty, crumbling shell. Level 3. Woodbury. Alright, let's break Woodbury down. On the surface, this place was the ultimate survivor's paradise. We're talking strong walls, a fully armed militia, and even hot showers. It felt like a little slice of the old world. A real town where people could sleep soundly at night. From a pure defense standpoint, it was a fortress. They had guards on the walls 24/7, and more than enough firepower to handle any stray walkers or small threats. It was the kind of place that made you think, yeah, we could make it here. But here's the thing about Woodbury. Its greatest strength was also its single massive flaw. The entire operation was a cult of personality built around one man, the governor. He was the charismatic leader who held everything together with a smile and a steady hand. But underneath that was a seriously unhinged mind. The community's safety, its rules, its very existence, all depended entirely on his sanity. And as we saw, that was a very, very shaky foundation. The moment his carefully crafted image cracked, the whole town fell apart in an instant. When his people finally saw his true tyrannical colors and refused to follow him into a suicidal battle, he turned his gun on them. The fortress collapsed from the inside because the guy in charge lost his mind. It was a house of cards, and one strong gust of crazy was all it took to blow it over. This serves as a brutal lesson. The strongest walls in the world mean nothing if the person leading you is the real monster. Level 4. The Prison. Now we're diving into one of the most iconic spots in The Walking Dead, the West Georgia Correctional Facility, or as Rick's crew calls it, Home Sweet Prison. The prison pops up in Season 3, turning from a zombie-infested mess into a shelter for survivors. It's a massive men's jail near Noonan, Georgia, that got overrun early in the apocalypse during a wild riot. Fires wrecked the admin building, letting walkers shuffle in, but Rick's group shows up like heroes, clearing out the undead and claiming it as their own. They even snag some leftover inmates who join the party after a bit of drama. Its defense consists of pre-existing high double fences keeping the biters at bay, plus watchtowers for spotting trouble from afar. The gang clears internal threats like walkers in the tombs, those creepy dark halls, sets up cell blocks for living, and later adds gardens, pig pens, and even spikes around the gates to impale incoming zombies. It's got armories, infirmaries, and cafeterias stocked from the old days. But hey, nothing's perfect in Zombieland. Those vulnerable entrances, like gates and breach points from the fire damage, are a nightmare waiting to happen. And self-sufficiency? Not so hot. They're low on farming at first, and super dependent on scavenging runs for food and meds. Plus, human threats like the governor's raids turn it into a sitting duck for sieges. The prison is a temporary spot at best. It's killer for initial defense, holding off hordes and giving folks a breather, but super shaky against big attacks or outbreaks like that nasty flu epidemic. In the end, tanks and battles trash it, leaving it abandoned and overrun. Still, it gave us epic moments. Who can forget Herschel's last stand? Level 5. Hilltop and the Kingdom. Now we're getting into the big leagues. Level 5 is where communities started actually building a life. We're talking about the Hilltop and the Kingdom. These places were the dream team, the power couple of the post-apocalypse. The Hilltop was about sustainable farming life. They had crops, they had animals, they knew how to feed people for the long haul. Over at the Kingdom, you had Ezekiel and his tiger, Shiva, bringing a kind of leadership and spirit that made people feel safe and united. But even dream teams have their weaknesses. The big one for both communities was their walls. They were mostly made of wood. You don't need a tank to break through a wooden palisade. A determined enemy with some fire can do the trick. And that's exactly what happened. Their other major flaw was that, for a long time, they both got pushed around by bigger bullies like the Saviors. They had resources, but they didn't have the muscle to consistently defend them on their own. So, for the long term, their viability was moderate. They were fantastic at the whole living part of the apocalypse. People could have families, grow old, and have a real community, but their safety was always conditional. Without their alliance with Alexandria and each other, they were sitting ducks. They were a lesson that you can have all the food and good vibes in the world, but if you can't properly defend your home, someone stronger will always come to take it. Level 6. Alexandria. Alexandria is one of those places that almost feels too good to be real in a world filled with walkers and chaos. It's a full suburban neighborhood tucked behind tall, solid metal walls that look like they could stand up to anything. For newcomers, it's a shock. There's clean running water, working lights, a pantry that isn't empty, proper houses, and people who still believe in things like game nights and dinner parties. Compared to the outside world, Alexandria is basically paradise. But the safety of the place came with a big weakness. The early residents had no idea how dangerous things had become beyond their walls. While other groups were fighting for scraps, losing people, and battling walkers daily, Alexandria's people were gardening, chatting, and living like nothing had changed. They were peaceful, which is great, until trouble actually knocks. And trouble never stopped knocking. Because Alexandria sits near a major city, the walker population around it is massive. Every mistake, every loud noise, every unlucky event could bring hundreds of walkers straight to the walls. And that was just the undead. Human enemies were even worse. The wolves slipped in and tore through the community. A huge walker herd eventually broke through the wall like it was cardboard. Later, Negan and the Saviors bullied Alexandria into submission. After that, the Whisperers showed up with their masks, their herds, and their creepy whispers, pushing Alexandria to the brink again. The crazy part? Alexandria kept surviving. Every time the walls fell, the people rebuilt. Every time someone powerful tried to take over, the group pushed back harder. What started as a soft, sheltered community slowly turned into one of the toughest, most determined groups left in the apocalypse. Even after the Commonwealth came in and made life even messier, Alexandria still managed to stand. By the end, it was the people that made that possible. They learned, adapted, and refused to let the place die. Alexandria isn't perfect, but it bounces back from disasters that would wipe out most communities. It survives because the people refuse to quit, no matter how many times the world tries to break them. Level 7. The Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is the closest thing to the old world being rebuilt from scratch. They've got everything you wouldn't expect to see in an apocalypse. Working power, doctors, schools, restaurants, trains, and even a military that actually looks like a real army. Their soldiers patrol in full armor, follow strict orders, and guard a city of over 50,000 people. Most communities are happy if they have one working garden and a fence that doesn't fall apart. Meanwhile, the Commonwealth has entire neighborhoods, functioning courts, and a leader that acts like she's running a government instead of a survival camp. The place feels safe because it is safe. Walkers rarely get close, food systems run like clockwork, and you can actually sleep without expecting something to break in. For pure defensive power, this is the top of the pyramid. Now the danger is inside the system. The Commonwealth brought back society exactly how it used to be, including all the unfair parts. The rich still live like royalty, while the poor struggle, work long hours, and barely get a voice. Jobs are assigned based on what people did before the world ended, not what they're good at now. That creates resentment, protests, and eventually a full-scale rebellion. And at the center of it all is Governor Pamela Milton, who cares more about maintaining her world than fixing the broken parts. She uses the military to control people, hides the truth, and even sacrifices poorer neighborhoods to keep the wealthy safe. That kind of leadership turns a strong community into a pressure cooker. If you're judging purely by resources, military strength, and stability, the Commonwealth could survive for decades. It has everything a long-term civilization needs, but its survival depends entirely on who's running it. With a fair leader, it thrives. With another corrupt one, it collapses from the inside. Strong enough to last forever, but fragile enough to fall apart overnight. If you enjoyed the video, YouTube thinks you'll love this one too.